Justice Betty King heard a plea to manslaughter on behalf of Ms Colour, and I will, if you'll indulge me, because I can actually read this writing, read a little bit about what her life was, and this is taken from the matter of Colour, which is 2010 Victorian Supreme Court. Her Honour says, just dealing first with some of the matters contained in materials that were handed up. On 25th of July 1986, you were the subject of a notification. This is Melissa Colour. And that said, assistance of police required to remove the child from what is referred to as the Lion Street dump in Cairns on the basis it was overcrowded and unhealthy environment with inadequate living conditions. Alternative accommodation was sought for the child. The mother refused to leave. She remained at the camp. Adults were drinking. Mother and grandmother persistently refused to remove the child from the camp, which was deemed to be an unhealthy environment, but it was their home. And so at 18 months, Melissa Colour comes before the notice of the Child Safety Service in Queensland. Her story goes on so that by the age of 16, she's classified an alcoholic and a polysubstance abuser. There's a history and documentation in relation to a very long history of sexual assaults, and there was no work done in respect of caring for her since 1994 on the documentation provided. In 1999, again, there was a case note to the effect that the office had received a fax from crisis care that a child under care and protection with little contact, and they were releasing her from the care and protection as the department couldn't offer any further assistance. In January 2000, at 15, she was under the care and protection. She was living in a park with a 40-year-old man with an infected cut to the head, drinking methylated spirits, receiving the cut from her man. Her mother had a frontal brain injury from domestic violence and to this day remains in a wheelchair. She was living at the Bethlehem home, and Melissa was physical, emotional, sexual harm and neglect identified. By January 2000, still at the age of 15, there was an updated request. They couldn't get in contact with family, so they should close her file at 15, because clearly she didn't need any further care. That was in January 2000. By May 2000, she tried to hang herself. By June 2000, she was unallocated with any protection worker, and during the time of her supervision under the care and protection of the department, there were at least 5 suicide attempts noted. There were injuries for which she continues to have scarring, and looking just at 1 year, at least 6 incidents where there were reports either through police where she is the victim or self-harm attempts on her part. And the department sought to liberate her from their care once at age 12 and once at age 15, and it seems very little was done in the intervening years. She then comes to Victoria with that history, and that's really just the very tip of the iceberg in terms of what history she had and the shocking nature of the life that she's led. Her Honour notes that it continues ad nauseum, and it does. The examples go on and on and on and on and on. And she concludes in sentencing her, this is the perpetrator, this is not the victim. As a country and a society, we should be thoroughly ashamed of ourselves that you, Melissa, have been neglected and abused in a manner that you have been. It is exceedingly distressing that in this country, where we pride ourselves on quality, tolerance and fairness, that you could be so neglected and abused, and yet we as a society did nothing to stop it. When you were living with a 40-year-old man in a park at the age of 12, we as a society did not stop that. We did not come in and protect you, which clearly we should have done. As a community, we should hang our heads in shame. If you don't tell Her Honour, I won't. I don't agree with this part. This is not about your Aboriginality. This is about your childhood, which was taken from you, while we as a society did not make any of the difficult decisions that may have prevented this terrible harm that was done to you. The part I don't agree with is the part that says it's not about her Aboriginality, because in my view it is about her Aboriginality. And her Aboriginality puts her in a situation where she lives in the margins, where she suffers intergenerational trauma because her grandparents did, because her parents did, and because she came next. And she was forgotten, and that community did nothing. She's also a member of our community, and in my view, this is an abomination, as is Paul Carter's death, and they are just two examples of which we hear many, 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 many examples that make your hair curl. Not mine. That's why I had it cut off. So where does that fit in? I mean, Rickardick talked about this. It talked about Aboriginality. It talked about the issues that present. And the statistics tell us that time and time again, Aboriginal people experience different ways of being in our community. According to statistics that I was provided, 32%, this is in 2001 I might say, but 32% of non-Indigenous people completed Year 12 in 2001 and 13% of the Indigenous population completed Year 12. Life expectancy, we all know the rhetoric that goes around, 20-year difference. The statistics I have are slightly different to that, but there are vast differences in people's life expectancy. The ABS tells us that 46% of Indigenous people aged 15 years and older, 46%, in Victoria reported that they or a relative had been removed from their natural family. And of those, 35 years and older, 16% said they themselves had been removed from family. It's a very big percentage. Criminal justice system, Aboriginal people 10 times more likely to be identified for public order offences, 17 times more likely to be identified for aggravated burglary offences, 8 times more likely to be identified for homicide offences. And in terms of imprisonment, in 2006, and this Victorian look at Rickardick was in 2005, in 2006, nationally, Aboriginal people were 12.8 times more likely to be in prison than members of the mainstream community. 9.6% in Victoria in 2006. And we've learnt so much from what's produced in this document that in 2010, nationally, 14.2 times more likely to be in prison and 11.2 in Victoria. And so the numbers have gone up. And I wonder what that means for us, what we have learnt. I'm mindful of the heading or the topic of this conference, and I wonder very much how much we have progressed in that regard. Paul might give a glimmer of hope in relation to what is happening, but I won't. So those are the statistics, but what's more important in my view is that there are actually people behind these statistics. Paul Carter was one of those people. Melissa Cullacalla is one of those people. She's a person, not a statistic, who won the NAIDOC competition for art at Dame Phyllis Frost Centre, painting that T-shirt, which I ironed very carefully. That's a person who did that. Paul Carter, his family continue to grieve at the loss of him, and the community suffers at the loss of that person and the scar that remains. How am I going? Wrap it up. Okay, I will. I get told this every day. My experience, I've been at VALS for 8 years, as I said, and I've learnt a lot in that time, more than I can convey in 15 minutes. And my learnings have been about the disadvantage and trauma that's present every day in the lives of our clients and broader members of the community that are connected to those people. Those are members of my community and they're members of your community, and they occupy the fringes and they're often forgotten. But they are the most disadvantaged members of your community, and the scars that remain for allowing that to continue are deep, and they will go on for a very long time. On a more positive note, I've also learned about incredible strength, because when you hear the stories that we hear, that I hear, I'm amazed constantly, every day, by the incredible strength that people have to get up and keep going in the face of grief and loss at a rate of knots, poverty, discrimination, racism and incarceration of themselves, of family members, and yet there's a spirit in the community and there is a resilience which, in my view, is truly amazing. And it's quite humbling to be able to experience these stories with people who have such incredible strength. I've been overwhelmed by the generosity and patience and the trust and acceptance that the Aboriginal community has afforded me and my colleagues, and I'm disbelieving at the will that they have to keep going, really. For those reasons, I urge you today that if you take nothing else from me, if you've managed to stay awake, take an understanding and get a fire in your belly, because these people, as I've said, they're members of your community, and you should be outraged that this happens. You should be outraged that that happens, and it really is the responsibility of all of us. Rob Hulls, in October 2005, our former Attorney General, in this document, the implementation document for Rickardick in Victoria, said, and I might say he said this 1 year before Paul Carter died and 3 years before Melissa Colour was incarcerated, that he called on people to reflect on what lessons there might be for you, for your department, your agency, your organisation or your community, and put those lessons into action. One last thing I'll say is also, since that time, Melissa Colour's sister passed away by hanging in a Queensland prison, and another sister passed away by overdose in Victoria, having just been released from custody. So it's not going away, and really you need to take stock of that. That's all. Thank you very much.